Hey, welcome to Kevin Stoddard channel, and we're going to be talking to you about the plague, the grift, greed, and gaslighting of a Trump COVID corruption. I want you to know this because, this guy should be in jail, and his family too, and all the cronies that support him and make money off us, while they are making the largest corruption in U.S. history, by far bigger than Watergate, by far bigger than Iran-Contra, far bigger than the Teapot Dome. I don't know. Let's get to the story. Okay. Um, COVID. COVID, pro quo. Donald Trump's pro quo for killing us with corruption. Okay. I'm Kevin Stoddard, and this is the Kevin Stoddard channel, and we're reading from Mother Jones. The fundamental purpose of a government is rather simple: protect the citizenry. Do you feel protected? Any deliberate perversion of this priority is an exercise of corruption, especially when that basic aim is supplanted by a goal of personal gain. That's why Donald Trump's slow, ineffectual, self-serving, and deadly response to the coronavirus has been the most consequential act of corruption in the history of the United States and its government. It eclipses, as I said, Watergate, Teapot Dome, Iran scam, you name it. It also happens to be the continuation, perhaps, or the culmination of the corruption that Trump started spreading like a virus the moment he left the White House, entered the White House, excuse me. In his first year alone, he was involved in 3,100 actions that raised possible conflicts of interest, and he's doubled down on it the last 2 years. Corruption in government is generally thought of as an official exploiting power or positions for personal benefits, often to line his or her pockets, or those he favors, or associates or relatives or corporations. There's been plenty of that in the Trump years, and Trump was impeached for an act of outright corruption. He leveraged his office, his ability to grant a foreign leader a White House meeting, and to hold up nearly $400 million in military assistance to pressure the new president of Ukraine to initiate unfounded investigations that would help Trump politically. In the case of this corruption crisis, though, Trump embraced a similar me first course. He prevented the government from performing actions that could keep Americans safe because he believed downplaying the burgeoning crisis, we're talking here about the Pandora plague we're in, best served his political interest. He corrupted the mission of the U.S. government. As a result, tens of thousands of Americans died and the economy collapsed. Trump's record of inaction, incompetence, and inane remarks during the first months of the pandemic has been well documented. Yet he wasn't merely flailing around. He purposely thwarted official government responses in order to maintain some electoral chances for this year. He resisted an aggressive push for testing because that could yield higher number of confirmed coronavirus cases, and he believed that lower levels would be better for his re-election campaign. When Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar Azar warned Trump back in January that the pandemic was impending and he needed to get ready. Trump brushed him off as an alarmist. Azar's message was not in sync with Trump's decision to discount the coronavirus. In late February, Nancy Messonnier, an official at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, publicly said her agency expected widespread transmission and was preparing for a pandemic. Wall Street plunged, and this enraged Trump, who had recently declared that the virus miraculously went away and the situation was very much under control. He threatened to fire her. Trump failed to move quickly and impeded a fast and comprehensive response. His self-interest was always paramount to an absurd extent. He touted the ratings his coronavirus press conferences received and devoted more time during these briefings to deflecting responsibility. attacking the journalist, and blaming Democratic politicians then to mourning the dead. And his administration oversaw a $2 trillion economic rescue and bailout in March that was practically designed to facilitate more corruption. A huge piece of it was turned over to banks to manage, and the banks, rigged the system for preferred customers, which froze out many small businesses, at least initially, particularly outfits owned by people of color. In several cases, the funds went to companies, some run by the Trump donors, that hardly seemed the most needy. This package also included a pot of $500 billion for Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin to distribute to large corporations with a few strings attached and no oversight. The slush fund grew. In a further blow to transparency, Trump ousted the Inspector General, who was leading the task force assigned to monitor this relief package. In any time before this decade, you would have had this guy in jail by now. Trump's attitude toward the federal government at the start of the pandemic, it's all about me, he said, he thought anyway, was an extension of the rampant and more conventional corruption that's defined his regime. Once Trump, the long-time narcissistic pitchman, entered the White House, he viewed the government as an extension. Do you agree? Raise your hand if you agree. Expansion of his own business ventures and personal brand, and showed not a whit of concern for rules, norms, and constitutional provisions that had been established to hinder corruption in the United States. He brazenly ignored the emoluments clause of the Constitution, which prohibits a president from accepting payments from foreign entities. His properties, particularly the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., became favorite spots for overseas visitors, and including government officials, to stay at, hold events, and wine and dine. This placed money into Trump's bank account, kind of like a mobster, huh? Ivanka Trump, who owns a big piece of the Washington Hotel, also begs $1 million a year from its revenue. Here was an easy way for foreign governments, Washington lobbyists, and wannabe players, and others seeking preferential treatment and policies from Trump and his administration to engage in what amounts to legal bribery. In 2018, Trump reported income from at least 11 foreign countries. Several countries, including China, have granted Trump and Ivanka valuable trademarks. Trump's own campaign and Republican organizations have held events at his properties, which enriches him and his family. His visits to his local Florida Mar-a-Lago, his Palm Beach private club, have forced the Secret Service to spend millions that end up in the Trump organization he still owns. A report first issued in mid-2019 by Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Government, as noted earlier, said 3,100 actions that raised possible conflicts of interest were committed during the first year. Trump has steadfastly refused to follow tradition and release his tax returns. Let's put him in jail until he releases them. Given the constant stream of Trump administration scandals, it is tough to keep track of the cavalcade of crookedness. Controversies come and go quickly, forming an overwhelming blur of wrongdoings and sleaze. In fact, the high number of scandals provides Trump and his crew a degree of protection. Here are a few you may have forgotten. Top advisor Kellyanne Conway appears to have repeatedly violated the Hatch Act, which prohibits federal employees from using their office to affect the results of an election. She also used her position to promote Ivanka's clothing line. The White House did the same with the First Lady Melania Trump's jewelry company. Trump's original head of the EPA, the Department of the Interior, and the Department of Health and Human Services, Scott Pruitt, Ryan Zinke, and Tom Price, each resigned when faced with credible acts of corruption. Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, held on to millions of dollars on holdings and apparently, we're talking about billions probably, violated conflict of interest rules. Other top appointees, past and present, including Ben Carson and Mick Mulvaney, have been caught engaging in shady dealings over the last 3 years. let's see. The Trump administration has frequently taken actions that assist industries and companies that donate to Trump and the GOP. His personal lawyer ended up in prison in part because he committed bank fraud while paying hush money to a porn star at Trump's discretion. Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor, admitted to violating lobbying laws by failing to disclose that he lobbied for Turkey, which was earning him hundreds of thousands of dollars. How did he forget that? What all amnesia do they want you to have by the end of this administration in America? Don't let it happen. Remember, hold these people accountable for the next decades. Now, let's look at Exhibit A of corruption and how Trump didn't drain the swamp, but he actually had a petri dish of corruption for him, for his family, and his cronies. Exhibit A is Jared Kushner. He has an honored place on the Trump corruption roll call. Government and anti-nepotism rules had to be waived for him to join the White House in the first place as an advisor to his father-in-law. Kushner repeatedly did not fully reveal his holdings and potential conflicts, and his security clearance was denied because government officials were concerned about his private business interest and his vulnerability to foreign influence. No problem. Trump ordered Kushner to be granted clearance, and Justice Department did nothing. Kushner has routinely mixed White House business with his own business as he advised his father-in-law on matters stretching around the globe, including the Israel-Palestinian conflict. His family real estate firm reached out to a Chinese company tied to the Chinese government and then to the Qatari government in efforts to ward off financial defaults. A company largely owned by a Qatari government investment fund eventually rescued the Kushners. Until March of this year, Kushner also held a large interest in a real estate startup, Cater, that launched investment vehicles made possible by Trump administration's program promoted by Kushner and Ivanka Trump. During the pandemic, Kushner's practice of blurring the lines between business and government have been thrown into grotesque relief. As Trump bumbled, Kushner's assembled a shadow task force, separated from Vice President Mike Pence's entity, with members drawn from private industries that had keen interest and perhaps conflicts of interest related to the policies being discussed. This group of investors and entrepreneurs, including a former roommate of Kushner, made supply chain decisions that could lead to windfall profits for certain corporations who were involved in the matter. The White House refused to reveal all the members of Kushner's task force, which operated in secrecy, using private phones and personal email accounts in possible violation of federal transparency laws and without any oversight. Remember, Trump didn't promise any oversight except him. Kushner's off-the-book effort included a collection of volunteers from investment and consulting firms recruited to hand out government contracts for desperately needed equipment for the pandemic. This squad tried to facilitate deals often involving people with inside contacts, including Fox News personalities, while generally botching the job. FEMA officials referred to Kushner's crew as the children, and they likely drove up the prices significantly. I'll give you, in one recent report, they said the prices of the N95 masks went up 1,400% at point of purchase. At the same time, Oscar Health, a health insurance company that was initially controlled by Jared and his brother, Joshua Kushner, before Joshua took solo command, was used sub rosa by the White House to develop a website for a national coronavirus testing program that never materialized. It was another false promise from Trump. The company said it did the work for free, but this arrangement might still have breached federal law. So even in the middle of a national crisis, Kushner was freebooting and possibly grifting. There was no way to fully tell because he was defiantly ignoring the normal guidelines for government advisory panels. And I remind you, this is not 2019, this is not 2018, this is right now in 2020, people. The company said as the nation suffered, thousands dying, millions confronting economic calamity, Trump turned the government's coronavirus response into another quid pro quo. He threatened to withhold assistance from governors who did not publicly praise him. In fact, Trump proved a predication cast during the impeachment proceedings when Stanford lawyer Professor Pamela Karlan predicted what he would do. Here is what she said. And remember, it was Trump's efforts to muscle in on the Ukrainian president. Imagine, she said, living in a state hit by a terrible natural disaster. What would you think if your government asked for a meeting with the president to discuss getting disaster aid that Congress had already paid for? What would you think if the president said, I would like you to do the favor, I'll meet with you and I'll send disaster relief once you brand my opponent a criminal? Is that what Trump was saying to the governors of the United States in April, May? Wouldn't you know in your gut that such a president had abused his office? And of course, the Senate, who are corrupt, did not follow through on prosecuting Trump. Trump has weakened the government the way rot ruins a building. It attacks the structure. Yeah, this is important. He attacked the structure. He doesn't give a damn about the soundness of the system. In this fashion, Trump did little to protect the country from another profound attack. The Russian assault on American election in 2016 that was mounted to help him win. It was not in Trump's political interest to call attention to this covert warfare, so he didn't, even though he knew about it. He dismissed the threat and has assailed those agencies of government that investigated the attack and that have warned now that Moscow is still meddling in 2020, along with other slimy characters. The president's pandemic response is straight from the same Make Trump First playbook. For all the corruption he has enabled, enacted, and exercised that we know of and that is chronicled in many pages, thousands of pages of already filed reports, Trump sees that the government does not exist to defend the people from killer viruses or foreign attempts to subvert American democracy. It exists to protect and serve him. I'll say it again. After all, as Trump sees it, the government does not exist to defend the people from killer viruses or foreign attempts to subvert its democracy. It exists to protect and serve him. That is the core corruption of this president. It is manifested in minor acts of sleaze by Ivanka stuff, major acts of policy, let's kill regulations for industries that donate to us, and monumental decisions with immediate life or death consequences for thousands of Americans. Don't warn of a pandemic because that would screw with my re-election. Graft, greed, and more greed and grift have and always will be a problem in government. But with Trump, corruption kills and is killing. All right, guys, make sure that you're active in campaigns to get progressive people on the ballot. Progressive people who aren't taking money and from these other grifters and greedier folks, but are really interested in making America great for the first time, maybe in centuries. Anyway, we can do better, America. Get all the evangelical Christians to do what the Bible says and follow up on putting Trump and his cronies in jail and no longer giving free ride to the GOP, which has played them very badly over the last 3 decades. Okay, again, thank you for listening to the story and finding out about the plague of Trump a little bit more. Remember, it is an American plague that's backwards, just like it would be on the flag if we look at the flag of Trump, or upside down, showing danger. Act today. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to leave comments, please do that. But be sure to subscribe to the Kevin Stoda channel. This is Kevin Stoda from the porch, and I'm hoping you have a good day wherever you're at and a better tomorrow. We have to fix this. Okay, get informed and be active.